So welcome to 1007 ICT, 1807 ICT, and 7611 ICT. You will belong to one of those course codes. There are 3 versions of this course running at the same time in the same course website. We will gate you to the appropriate thing depending on which course you're actually enrolled in, so you shouldn't see the information that's specific to other parts of the course. And you should see only really the stuff that's specific to you. If you see something that you think is not specific to you, let me know, and we'll address that if it's an issue. So this lecture is on the course overview. The lecture is split up into 2 parts. Lecture 1 is 1A and 1B. So 1A is the course overview, and 1B will be an introduction to computing. So when we have these slides, the first slide will typically be a set of learning objectives. It'll tell you the kinds of things that we expect that you'll learn or have an understanding of at the end of this lecture. When we talk about have an understanding of, that probably means that you might still need to do some extra work to solidify the information that we've given you. So there'll be some workshop activities or some other stuff that you can do to get a better understanding or a deeper understanding of that stuff. So first thing is the contact details for your course convener. If you need to contact someone about this course, you should contact your course convener in the first instance. We'll talk about how to access the course website. I'm pretty sure most of you have already done that, or at least something like that for another course. We'll talk about what the course aims to achieve, the assessment requirements for the course, which is probably the most important thing from your end in terms of what you're expected to do and when, and how much those things are worth. We'll look at how student feedback has helped us to improve the current offering of the course. And so one of the things I'm particularly interested in is getting feedback from you to tell me, yes, things are working fine, things are not working so fine. If they're not working so fine, why not? And what can we do to improve that? And ideally, what can we do to improve it right now, not just for the next offering, right? So we like to get an incremental improvement as we go. We'll look at some details regarding the recommended textbooks, and then the content sections and how they map to chapters in the recommended text. So I'll just point out at this point that there is no required textbook for this course. You don't have to buy a textbook. There is plenty of information in the lecture notes. You can find lots of information on the internet about lots of this stuff as well. When you get stuff off the internet, you want to be careful that it's accurate, and also that it's the thing that we're looking for, not something in the same sort of general area which doesn't actually match what we're actually looking for. So we'll have a recommended text which fits fairly nicely with the content that we have, and I'll talk about that when we get to that section in the lecture notes. So the course conveners and the website. So the Gold Coast campus is Dr. Jessica Court. For Nathan and Logan campus, it's me, Sven Venema, and you'll see some contact information there. The most convenient way to contact us, these slides are available for you guys, so you can have a look at this stuff later on, and on the website the contact information will also be there. But the most convenient way to contact us will be through email. Depending on where we are, you may be able to catch us on the phone, but if we're not in our office and on a different campus, for example, then email is the best way to go. There's a course website on Learning at Griffith for this course. It has everything you need to know about the course. Right, so everything is in the one place pretty much. There are course profiles for these courses, and you'll notice that there's one for each offering. So they're all slightly different in terms of the campus that they're offered, but in general they cover the same kinds of things. So at this point I'll just go through the course profile for this particular offering. So I'm going to look at the 1007 version. If you're in a different version of the course, like if you go to on the course website, so I'll just run through it. So when you go to your portal, you'll find on the right hand side Learning at Griffith, and there's a bunch of courses that you're probably enrolled in. You choose the one that you are actually enrolled in. So this is 1007, 1807, 7611 Computer Systems Networks. You click on that, you'll go to the announcements page. This is the starting page for this particular course. The announcements are pretty important for this course because we will add things as we go. So every week, typically on a Sunday, I'll add some extra stuff. So on the Sunday night or on the Monday morning, have a look at the announcements to see what's been added. And typically it'll be things like the new workshop, right, or the new lecture notes, or whatever the information is that's relevant for that particular week coming up. There's a little introductory announcement which I email to you guys as well. I normally don't email the announcements, right? You'll get a lot of spam if I do that. So the announcements, visit the page. But the first one was important. It basically said, look, here's some information about when you start the course, in particular that the workshops start in week 1. Alright, that's not the same for every course. Some courses the workshop will start in week 2, for example. So you need to look at that on a per course basis. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll have a look at the course profile. So when you go to the course profiles link on the left hand side of the page, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of these course profiles. Pick the one that's relevant to you. I have chosen 1007 trimester 1 Nathan campus, right? That may or may not be relevant to you. If it's not relevant to you, pick your own. Does that make sense? And have a look through it. But you'll see very similar things to what I'm about to go through. So you'll see here there's some course details, the name, 10 credit points. There's a description of the course, assumed background. I'm looking at a slightly different view, I think, from yours. So this is probably the view that you see. No red in it. It'll just be black and white. There's a course description. Basically, the course description is an overall description of what you can expect this course to help you achieve. So basically, my sense of this course is it gives you an understanding of how a computer works and all the things that go along with that. So for example, you need to understand some number systems like binary numbers, for example, because we represent a lot of things to do with computing instructions and data and so on in binary numbers. So we need to learn about that. There's some logic that happens inside the computer. We use certain logic gates to do some kinds of computations, transform inputs from one kind to another kind. So we need to look at logic gates and how we glue those together to get some logic circuits, for example. Then we have to look at some of the components like the CPU, the RAM, right? All those kinds of technical specifications for those things, what they mean, why are they there, basically. Then we look at things like the operating system that's running on top of those components. So operating systems like Windows, Mac OS, Linux, right, Android, there's lots of different variations on those. Once we've done that, we talk a little bit about the memory organization in terms of how things are actually laid out in the memory of the machine so that it works efficiently and effectively. And then after that point, we start talking about the networking aspect. So when you connect multiple computers together, how does that work? What are the frameworks, the ideas that allow that to happen? So the way the course works, we start at the very low level, the electrical, kind of level, the logic level, and we go up and up and up and up and up until eventually we cover some really high level concepts. And we don't really know in this course how that actually works technically, right? That's not the purpose of this course, but we get an understanding of it's there, and this is why it's there, and this is how it roughly works, right? There are other courses where you will delve more into the details of probably every specific part of what we're talking about in this course. One of the things that I'd like you to get out of this course, at the end of it at least, if you imagine that, as an IT professional, you're going to go and buy a computer, and you go to the computer salesman, and they start talking to you about chips and all this kind of stuff, you should be able to understand exactly what they mean when they're telling you about these things, right? At the very least. Okay. There's a section here on previous student feedback. Have a look at that. I'll talk about that in the lecture notes. There's the course convener information, so you can have a look at this to find out how to contact the person for the particular campus that you're on. Have a look in the lecture notes as well, and again, it's in the course website. So there's multiple places where you can find the contact information for the course. All right. This is the course information part. Then there's a section on aims and outcomes, and it basically says, look, there are some learning outcomes. These guys, there's 5 of them for this course. These are things that at the end of this course you should be able to demonstrate or achieve. So one of them is operate digital data and construct and evaluate digital logic components and processes. This basically means you're able to manipulate binary numbers, for example, and you're also able to look at a small logic circuit, work out what it's doing, and maybe design one yourself based on a specification. All right. We're not looking at very complicated things for this, but just the basic ideas. There's 5 of those. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the details for those, but have a look at them. Have a look at what you can expect to be able to do at the end of this, and it'll give you an insight into the kinds of things that you'll be exposed to. There's also a section here on graduate attributes. Now, this is for when you graduate. So at the end of your program, you will have built a whole lot of skills. This course is not going to build all of those skills, right? You're going to develop them in lots of different courses, but there are some that we will focus on in this particular course, and you can have a look at what those might be. Learning resources. There are some required resources for these courses. For this course, there is no required textbook, so you do not have to buy a textbook. There's a list here that you can click on. There's a reading list, for example. And the recommended resources, there is a textbook that we have as a recommended resource. It has been the required resource in the past, so there should be second-hand copies floating around, I would think, fairly cheaply, right? Because it has been used in the past, so there's some around. There's some in the library. You can buy a new one, or you can buy an online version if you like, but have a look for the second-hand versions first. Would be my suggestion. So save some money. Um, you can click through those. There's a number of university learning resources. I think this is pretty useful. At least have a look at this to see what's available, so that if at some point you have an issue or a situation, you go, well, I want to be able to do this. I don't really know how to do it. There are some ways to help you achieve that particular thing, and there are lots of different support services in the university for lots of different reasons. Um, you'll find that this is a course profile for this course. The course profiles for the other courses that you're doing will be laid out exactly the same way, have the same kinds of information specific to that course. So I'm running through this with you now so that you've seen one. I think that's really important. You should look at every course that you do at least once at the start, read through it to see what the rules are for this particular course. All right, that's particularly important with the learning activities and then the assessment, because those will be different for each course. So learning activities, you'll see there are lectures every week, and they have different content areas. This is a guide, just because it says here 26 March 18 processors. Yeah, it probably will happen around that time, but you notice we'll have public holidays and so on, so there will be some adjustments. So don't take this as the exact literal truth. It's definitely the sequence we're going to follow, but there may be some slight movement depending on public holidays and so on. There are a number of components for this course. There's a lecture component, there's a workshop or laboratory component. That's the same thing, by the way. And then you may have a common time depending on the campus you're on. So the lecture is 2 hours a week. It may be split up into two 1 hour blocks. If it's 2 1 hour blocks, you have to attend both 2 1 hours because they're actually separate. They just split across different parts. There's a workshop or a laboratory 2 hours every week. The idea is that you do the active work in the workshop, so you get some content in the lecture, and then the next week's workshop you'll work on that content to get a better understanding of it. The workshops are really important for this course. You notice we have a big range of stuff that we do, right? We cover pretty much the whole operation of a computer and a networking environment. We do that at a fairly high level, right? So you can do a lot more detailed work on any of those components, but it does mean there's a lot of stuff to cover, and to achieve well in the exam at the end, which covers everything, the best way to do that is to do the workshops every week, and you're basically studying for the exam as you do that. Alright, so you should be turning up to the workshops every week. They're worth a little bit in terms of assessment marks, so I'll talk about that again when we get to that section in a little bit. But you will do better in this course if you do the workshops. Alright, it's basically that simple. The assessment plan. So what does it actually look like? We have learning activities, laboratory exercises. There are 10 of these in weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and they're worth 2% each for a total of 20%. They're split up into two parts. One part is an online quiz with 5 questions every week, which is due before your workshop starts. So it's like the preparation where you have done the reading and you've got some understanding of the concepts. And then when you get into the workshop, you will actually do an activity. We usually give you some information to help you with doing that activity. You will do that activity, it's an assessment, and at the end of the workshop that assessment will be completed and marked. Right, so there's no takeaway stuff that you have to do outside of the workshop. It's all done in that component. So there's 10 of those. They start in week 2. Workshops start in week 1. Right, so the first one is not assessed, and the main reason for that is so that you get a practice, you get an idea of what's coming. Right, so everything you'll see with this course, we try and give you a taste first, understand what's going on, and then we do a more serious version of that. There's a test or a quiz, mini test 1, mini test 2. They're in week 4 and week 8, and they're worth 5% each. Now, these were originally set up to be done in the lecture time, and that's how we've run them in the past. There are some issues at the moment around the Commonwealth Games in terms of people being available and being able to access the university during that time, because there's going to be a lot of movement of people. So we will make a change to that in lecture part for it. It won't be run in the lecture. It will probably be run in a slightly different way. Maybe it'll be online. We'll give you some information about that later on when it becomes more closer to that time. But there will be a change in that. It'll still be in week 4, so that won't change. And it will have the same requirements, but it'll just be run slightly differently. And there'll be definitely an announcement about that the next week or so. There's an assignment. It's 5 p.m. Friday, week 10. That's a long way away, right? Is it really a long way away? Not really. It goes really quickly. So Friday of week 10, 20%. You will get the assignment in a couple of weeks, basically, and then we'll start working on it. It'll be a digital logic type assignment, so you'll be working on logic gates and building something. And so when we start doing that section, we'll talk a little bit more about what the assignment entails. And that's the lecture 3 is when we start that part, which is basically in week 3. There's an exam, final exam in the final examination period. So after the course is finished, actually after week 12, there's a final examination period, and it's worth 50%. That's a big chunk of marks. All right. What are the easiest marks to get in this course, do you think, and what are the hardest marks to get? Let's go with the hardest marks. What do you think the hardest marks are? Is it these guys? The 50% final exam? What do you think? Typically, your final exams are more challenging, right? You have a compressed amount of time. If you don't know it, you can't go away and study it. You have to actually answer it on the spot. So the easiest marks will be the workshops, right? You have a couple of hours to do stuff. You get some support in doing it. And they train you for completing the final exam. So it's like a way to practice for it as well. So I would really focus on the workshop marks, and you will see that they will benefit you for the final exam as well. There's a whole bunch of detail here about the assessments. Right, so you can have a read through this. This is the specific detail for all the things I've just talked to you about. One of the things that you do need to be aware of is for the laboratory exercises, so those 10 exercises. It's a formative assessment item, so it's kind of like we're helping you understand how things work. You're getting marks for it, but they're not big marks. They're 2% each. Right? It's not like a final exam where it's 50%, right? And so unless at least 5 of these weekly lab exercises have been completed, so you have to do half of them, turn up to the workshop, actually do the assessment. If you don't do more than 5 or 5 or more, then you won't get a mark for that component. So you won't get any of the 20%. So it's important that you're aware of that requirement. If you feel that you're in danger of not meeting that requirement, come and talk to your course convener. Right? Make sure that you do that before the end of the course. I think it's not that bad. It's 5 out of 10. You should be able to make that. But if you can't, talk to us because you will fall foul of that requirement. There are policies and guidelines. There's a whole stack of these. I recommend that you read through this at least once. I know there's a lot of detail here, but at least be aware of what's there so that when you run into an issue, you can go, oh, there's a policy that covers that. Right, and you'll be able to find some information about it. Now, particularly, there is the student academic misconduct policy, and that one is basically about people who take other people's work as their own or cheat or plagiarize, right? So that one's really important in terms of knowing what your rights and responsibilities are. We'll talk about that for this course in weeks 7 or 8 as well, right? But and that will differ from course to course. So some courses will say you can do this, fine. Other courses will say no, you can't do this. Right, so you have to know which course you're in and what the requirements are for that course. The other one that's really important is the assessment policy. So assessment, right, is where you get the marks for things. So it's important that you know again what your rights and responsibilities are, and if things aren't working correctly for you, what your options are. So for example, you've been sick, right, and you're not able to submit something on time. What can you do about that? There are ways to work through that, right? So at least be aware of those things. So have a look through those. There's a bunch of these, and there's a few student-related policies down the bottom as well that you can have a look at. Now you don't have to do that for every course, right? But at least have a look at it once, I think would be useful. Okay, so that's the course profile. There is one for each course that you do, and it is, I think, useful to look at the start of the course what's actually expected, particularly the assessment. Look at the fine print. Like for us, the fine print is you have to do 5 out of the 10 workshops to get a mark for that component. Other courses will have different fine print that you have to be aware of. Is it okay at the end of the course to say, oh, look, I didn't know that I had to do 5 out of 10 of these workshops? No. The expectation is that Here's the document. You have looked at it, right? You're aware of those things. Okay. So that was the course profile. So let's look at what the course is about. So the course is an under the hood course. The goal is to help you understand a number of things. Basic one is the principles of computing and computer technology. You're doing an IT degree of some flavor, or you're taking an IT course, right, of some flavor. It's important that you understand how a computer actually works at some level. Do we need to know all the details? What do you think? Not at all, right? We're going to gloss over a lot of stuff, but we need to have a sort of a basic idea of how things are actually working. One of the key things that I'm interested in is making sure that, look, is there any magic inside this computer? It's very complicated, but is there a mechanical way or a mechanistic way that it's doing things? Absolutely, right? There is a way that you can understand this stuff. It's not magic. We'll look at some hardware and software related technical terms. We'll look at what computers can and can't do. And just off the bat here, question, can computers think? What do you think? Shaking the head there, no. Anyone saying yes? Not like humans? Okay, so depending on what you mean by think, first of all, so you might have to define that. Probably we're not there yet. Maybe we get there. Are they looking into doing that kind of stuff? Absolutely, right? So what about my MacBook Pro here? What do you think? Can it think? No, right? So that gives you a kind of sense about, you know, what's actually possible with some of these machines, right? So we'll look at the relative effectiveness of computer solutions. So one of the things I might ask you is, look, and you're already familiar with doing this yourself. You do this on a daily basis pretty much. If I said, look, I want you to find some information, right? What search engine are you going to use? Which one would you use? Google? Anyone else would pick something else? Probably you'll pick Google, right? Because it has a reputation for being, you know, the best search engine at the moment. Are there other search engines? Sure. Are they better at some things than Google, for example? Maybe they are. They may be more specialized at certain things. So what you're doing is you're rating the relative effectiveness of a particular solution to something. Right? You're saying for this thing, I'll choose this one. For that thing, I'll choose that one. Does that also work with computer solutions? If I want to play games, new games, will I buy an old computer? Probably not. It's not going to be able to handle the requirements of what the new games are asking. So I'll pick the most effective solution for that. Now you can do that with hardware, you can do that with software, you can do that with algorithms, so processes for working things out, and you can calculate how effective or efficient they are. We'll also look at network-related protocols and technologies, and that's really the last half of this course. And we'll talk about, you know, how does networking actually work conceptually? How does it work in terms of moving information around? Course details, we talked about this a little bit already. It has 2 hours of lectures, 2 hours of labs or workshops. We will use the word lab and workshop interchangeably. It means the same thing. So depending on which page you're looking at, you'll see lab or workshop. That's fine. And you'll see probably that's the same thing for other courses as well. The lectures and labs are run on 3 campuses at different times. You must attend the lectures and labs on one campus, and actually the campus on which you are enrolled. You cannot mix and match that stuff because you'll be out of sync. All right. If your campus has 2 one-hour lectures, you need to attend both of those 1-hour lectures. I'll just give you the insight behind why we might do the 2 1-hour lectures. We find typically that some of the stuff that we cover is very technical, right? And so 2 hours of just maths or, you know, logic circuits or whatever, it can be a little bit much. So we try and separate that out so you get a little bit of a chance to go, okay, review the information before you get the 2nd hour. And we find that tends to work reasonably well. There may be a common time at your campus depending on the size of the campus, and so the common time is not compulsory. It's basically if you have some questions, come and ask in that time. If you don't have any questions, then you don't need to turn up. All right, so it's an extra hour where you can get assistance outside of the workshops and the lecture times. Workshop and lab allocations, you need to attend the lab or workshop in which you're enrolled. You cannot just change labs and turn up to another one. That's not going to work. If you feel that you need to change, you can ask permission to change, and if you're able to change, you will be granted permission by your course convener, right? So you need to contact them to see if that's possible, right? The lab activities, every week you'll do 2 hours of learning activities. There will be an assessment in those from weeks 2 onwards. The assessment is able to be done within those 2 hours. It will be marked within those 2 hours. And when you do the workshop, you might show your answer to a particular part of it to the workshop demonstrator and say, look, is this right? And they'll say yes or no. If it's no, right, they will say why it's not right and what you need to do to fix it. And then you can fix it before the end of the workshop and still get a mark for that. Right, so it's kind of an iterative process. So there's no reason why you cannot get full marks at the end of the workshop if you are able to process all those things, right? And so you will get feedback on what you're doing as you're going. So the assessments, we talked about those, weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, subject to public holidays, and we may or may not be affected by public holidays depending on the campus that you're on and when your workshop actually is. So one of the public holidays that's coming up is Anzac Day, for example, and that will affect the Wednesday classes, if there are Wednesday classes. There are plans in place to adjust for people who miss a workshop because of a public holiday or some other event, right? And so typically we'll tell you about that closer to the time of that event, and you'll be able to work through that, and it won't disadvantage you in that sense. You won't lose marks because you couldn't attend a workshop. Individual assignment with 20%, 5 p.m. Friday, week 10. The mini test, 10%. I already mentioned about those, the week 4 and week 8. And there are some variations to that because of the Commonwealth Games for this particular offering. Final exam worth 50% in the final examination period. Already mentioned that the requirements for the assessment were that you need to have done 5 out of the 10 workshops. And if you don't, then you won't get a mark for that component. And again, if you're likely to run into problems around that, come and contact your course convener and see what we can do about that. Academic integrity, so plagiarism, it's an attempt to gain credit for something that's not your work. It's basically you're pretending that you did it by submitting it as under your own name. So any plagiarism will be dealt with under the rules applying under the university handbook. That's one of those policies that I just mentioned to you before, and it's described in the subject outline of the course profile. There is a tutorial available on Learning at Griffith, which is called the Academic Integrity Tutorial. You can have a look at that and see what they mean by some of those terms and what's expected in that sense, to give you a sense of what you can and can't do. If you ever have any questions about that stuff, come and talk to your course convener. Rule of thumb would be, like if you ask questions about it before you do something and then you don't do it, that's fine. If you have already done something and submitted something for work, there's not much that can be done after that point, right? So find out before what you can and can't do. And again, this will change depending on the course you're doing. Some courses will say, for example, yeah, you can copy and paste stuff from the internet, that's no problem. Other courses will say, no, you absolutely cannot do that, right? So it depends on what the purpose of the course is, whether they will allow certain things or not, and you need to check what that is. As I said, we will talk specifically about this course, what plagiarism looks like for this particular course, the assessments, for example, and we'll do that later on in the course when it becomes more appropriate to do that. So when we actually have an assignment, for example, and you'll see examples of what's okay and what's not okay. So we are interested in getting feedback pretty regularly for this course. We'd like to make it the best course that it can be. Interesting, challenging obviously, but still, achievable. And for every course that you do, at the end of the semester, you're given an online opportunity to give feedback for the course. So every student gets that for every course. So if you're doing 4 courses, you get 4 versions of these. And there's usually one for the course itself, how good was the course in certain aspects, and then there's one for the teaching staff saying how good were they at teaching, how bad were they at teaching, that kind of stuff. So that's great. It's at the end of the course, which means that anything that you say cannot affect this version of the course. It'll affect the next one, which is nice for the next people, but it doesn't help you guys, right? So what I tend to do is I'll ask you questions as we go through the course, pretty much at the end of every lecture, to say, well, what's working, what's not working, and if something's identified that we can address right now, we'll do it right now. We'll fix it up. Does that make sense? Okay, and so we're interested in improving the course. We've been doing this for a while, so we've got some feedback from previous offerings, and I'll just give you some of the feedback from these ones. So basically, there were a lot of assessment items. It does still seem like there's a lot of assessment items, maybe, like there's one every week, but they're done in the workshop, so they don't really impact you outside of the workshop in that sense. You don't have to take them home or anything like that. So what we did was we've consolidated those into the workshops. We've reduced the number of assignments from 2 to 1, which is great. It's only one assignment. We also reduced the scope of the course in terms of previously we would have one topic and we'd have a number of variations on the same topic, which is great. It's really interesting, but we've sort of rescoped that to give you just the focal points. If you want more information on those things, I'm happy to provide some of those, but there are probably other courses where you get more detail on those things anyway later on in your program. And we also have a recommended text that, it's there so that if you have a question about a specific part, you can read a little bit more in depth about that particular thing. So that's why that is useful. And so if you have some of those questions, it's in the library. There's some second-hand versions, for example, so have a look at that. So the recommended text, there's no prescribed text. The recommended text is by Barry G. Blundell, Computer Systems and Networks, first edition in 2007. There is still no second edition, and it's still okay. I mean, it's basically talking about some introductory computing concepts, so they haven't really changed that much in that sense, at least the introductory ones. It's not necessary to purchase the recommended text, and where possible and appropriate, in the lecture notes, there'll be a little brackets section something that refers to that textbook. So if you see that in the lecture notes, there is a section in the textbook that talks about this in a little bit more detail, so you could kind of cross-reference that. So what does the course actually contain? What does it entail? We have computer architecture. So the first part is basically around the hardware. And so data representation, how do you store information inside a machine? Well, it's electrical. There's got to be some kind of electrical signals. In this course, we don't deal with electrical signals. We deal with an abstraction or a model of those. So electricity can be on or off. So we have 0 is off and 1 is on. Make it simple. When you have two states like that, 0 and 1, you're talking about binary states. There are two of them. And so we can use binary numbers to represent those two states. Right, that's how this kind of works. So we'll talk about the binary numbers in the digital logic chapter, which is next week, and you'll get an introduction to that. Once we've worked out how to store information in a computer, we'll look at, well, how do we move it through the computer? How do we change it? How do we get some inputs, convert them to some other output? That's the digital logic part, using logic gates and so on. And there's some software that we have that you'll use in the workshops where you can actually just draw some of these circuits and plug stuff in and see how it works. We talk about processors, we talk about memory organization. This is the hardware part. The next part will be how computers work, and so this is the software part, which is the instruction sets. They will probably also use binary numbers and so on, right? But this is more what kind of things can you tell the machine to do. And this is very low level, right? If you're writing a program in Java or C or something like that, you're probably working at a much, much higher level. So one statement in a Java program might be 100 of these low-level instructions, right? Then we look at operating systems and applications. What does the environment actually need to do so that you can use this machine effectively? All right. If you didn't have an operating system, it would be very, very difficult to use a computer. Right? You'd have to basically physically tell it what to do every time. So there's some convenience around that. Then after that point, we look at networks. And so computer networks, packet transmission, internetworking, routing protocols, applications, and security. It's actually application security is not necessary to do with networking, but it has some ties to that as well. And so you'll see that we start talking about how do you move information around between computers. What do you need to do to enable that stuff? And then the last part is revision. And so in week 12, we will do the whole 2 hours of revision of what we've done throughout the course. And it's just pointing out the highlights, the kinds of things that were key, I guess, ideas as we went through. There's a library guide on the library website. You can have a look at that. And I think there's an ICT specific one or there's a course specific one. So they have some information about some resources that might be useful to you. Right? So we haven't finished yet in terms of the presentation. The slides are finished for this section though. So in summary, what we looked at for this course, so you'll see a summary slide at the end of each lecture as well, saying, well, what did you actually achieve in this particular section? Looked at the course conveners on the website, talked about what the course is about, the assessment, the feedback from previous students, recommended text, what's in the course content, and then the library guide. The next set of slides will be lecture 1B, which will be an introduction to computers. And here, what we're intending to do is give you a little bit of a history about, well, how did this start? What were the different variations on computers so far? Basically, how did we get to where we are right now, right? And I think that's important to see what the advancements have been. What do you think about computing? Is it a static discipline, or is it changing very quickly all the time? Which one of those would you agree with the most? Changing very, very quickly all the time. Actually, while I've been talking, something important has probably happened, right? So we're not going to be able to keep up with all that stuff, right? So we're just going to have to look at some trends and ideas about where we think things are going, right? And so that was the lecture 1A slides. I'll continue with the course website because there's a few things that I'd like to point out to you guys here. On the left, there are a bunch of links. All right, so you've already seen the announcements. This is where you get messages from me or Jessica saying, you know, something new has happened. Pay attention to this part, or click on this link and get this resource. There's a course profile we talked about, so you can have a look at those. There's some staff information, which will have the information for staff members here. So if you don't want to go looking through the course profile, for example, at the moment it's just my contact information, but Jessica's will be up there at some point as well for the Gold Coast. You can find the information here, right? So it's a nice, quick, easy way to find contact information for your teaching staff. There's a course content section. Let me just get rid of some of these. The course content will have in it a number of things. So lectures, workshops. There will be a section lecture recordings when we actually have some recordings for the lectures. And these are the recordings that I do on my laptop for the Logan and Nathan campuses. There'll be an AVI file which you can download, or there'll be a YouTube version that you can just stream. So whichever's most convenient for you, use that one. There will be an other resources section. You can have a look at what's in there. There's lots of stuff that might be useful to you to help you understand certain things, or external documentation that goes through the material that we cover in a slightly different way. So different people think in different ways, learn in different ways. So we'll give you a couple of ways to look at the same information. All right. You can certainly find your own stuff on the web as well. So if you find some stuff and it's good, let us know. And if it's good enough for the students to have a look at, we'll put a link to it and make it available to other people as well. There's a bunch of video overviews for different things. This is the binary number things I think they are. There's some links here for VPNs and accessing the resources from home. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail when I get to the weekly schedule. In the lectures, you'll see that there are a bunch of lectures, and there's one for each week. In the lecture, you'll see the lecture notes. You probably have already come across these already if you had a look at the course website. At the moment, we have until week 4, which is lecture 3C, which is the third hour of lecture 3. And on Sundays, usually, I'll make the next one available. So I want to give you enough that you can sort of have a look at what's coming up, but not too much to be overwhelming in terms of, well, what do I focus on, right? So keep an eye out for the updated lectures. On the workshops, at the moment, the first 2 workshops are available. There will be more workshops available as well as we go. So on Sunday, again, I'll put up the next one. So we'll always be a week ahead, right? So this week is week 1. Week 2 is already there. You can be looking at it. There's no problem with that, all right? Have a look at it, see what's coming up. Week 3 will be available on Sunday. When you look at, say, week 1 workshop, what you'll see, now I see all of the stuff because I'm the teaching staff member for this course. You will see one of these. You'll either see 1007/7611 workshop because you're in that cohort, or you'll see the 1807 version. It's a slightly different version for those students. So you should see one of those, and you'll also see an online quiz. This is the one you should do before the workshop. Now the way it works for workshop 1, obviously you haven't done the workshop before, so you don't know that you need to do the quiz before the workshop, so we've made it available until this Sunday, so you can just play around with it, right? But the other ones, they will stop just before your workshop starts, right? So you need to have done it before that point. So this one is just a sample one. It's not worth any marks. You can try it out. Make sure that the quiz part works for you, right? That you understand what you have to do to actually submit one of these things. It's pretty straightforward, but have a practice at it. It's not worth any marks. It does give you some feedback in the sense of what answer you gave and whether you were right or wrong. It doesn't tell you what the right answer is, right? And what will happen in the workshops typically is you will have finished that quiz, and then we will discuss the quiz in the workshop, right? So you will get some feedback about it, but not necessarily immediately. It'll happen a little bit later on. Okay. So that's the workshops. There is an assessment tab. There's nothing in there at the moment, but there will be the assignment. So you'll see the assignment at some point, and there'll be an announcement saying it's available, so have a look at that. The things that you see on the left here may differ from mine. For example, I can't use the My Marks because I don't have any marks. But if you are enrolled in the course as a student and you click My Marks, you should see a page that says the marks for this course for the components so far are, here they are. So you can check the marks that you have as you go. I recommend that you do that. People make typos, right? So you might get 1.25 instead of 1.5 marks for something, right? Check, make sure that the mark that you have recorded there accurately reflects the mark that you believe that you got. If not, contact either your workshop demonstrator or the course convener. Alright, so it's perfectly possible to fix that up, and I'm aware that it does happen, right? So make sure that you check. Echo 360 is here. At the moment, there's nothing in it. There are no recordings. Those Echo 360 recordings will come from the Gold Coast version, so if you want to look at an alternate version to the ones that I'm providing here, feel free to do that. Right, and they'll be available, I think, on Fridays. Thursdays or Fridays is that lecture. I've left hopefully the best part to last here, the weekly schedule. So you'll see this link, and what I would like to do, I've shown you the different parts of the website. I'd like you to use this document to navigate the website if you can. It's much more convenient. So on this page, it's a study schedule. It says week 1. Are we in week 1? Yes. Which lectures should we be looking at? These ones. You can click on those links. It will take you directly to those lectures. Which workshop is it that we're looking at? Workshop 1. It's not assessed. Is there a mini test? No. Is there an assignment? No. Are there any recordings? Not yet, but there will be later, and they'll be made available here. And the comment is anything that might be interesting to you. So for example, if you're off campus, some parts of the Griffith resources are not available to you. They're only available to you as you're logged into this campus network. So you can't access them. However, if you have a virtual private network or a VPN software, which you can download from the website, the Griffith website I should say, you can install that software on your computer, laptop, whatever, and you can pretend like you're on the Griffith network. Okay, so you can access those things from outside. May not be that useful for this particular course. I don't know that we use any of those particular things directly here, but if you do, that's how you get around that problem. There are other university resources that you can connect to. One of those is when you're in the workshops or the lab computers here, you have a drive that you can save stuff on, right? And basically it follows you around, so if you're on a different computer you can still access it. You can access that from outside the university as well. So if you've got files on there, you can access those. There's a link here to quantum, optical, and molecular computing. That might seem like a strange link to put in here, but in Lecture 1B, we talk about, well, where's the future of this, and these are some of the things that we talk about in terms of the future. So there's some interesting links on those, and if you're interested, have a look at those. And there's a bit more, I guess, insight than we're able to cover in that very short lecture. See, for week 2, it'll be the same. So when we get to week 2, there'll be a yes here. This is the week. I'm trying to make sure that we know which week we're in, because I understand that it's not always easy to work out where we're at in terms of the course, particularly when we get the Commonwealth Games holiday. That may be a little bit challenging. So we'll keep up to date. There's some binary resources, workshops, and so on. So you'll see we're up to week 4. On Sunday, that will increase to week 5, and so on. So we'll keep moving forwards. So the next section will be Introduction to Computers, Lecture 1B, and that is the end of this lecture.